Hello dear participants. Now let's skip to module 4.3, Climate and Environmental Projects in Public Procurement. Identifying corruption risks through contract information and subcontracting. Let's start with the reporting template. This webinar is designed to guide you through the monitoring process in a clear and structured way. It follows the same logic as the report for monitoring projects. The reporting template is divided into 3 steps. Step 1 is the desk analysis. This is where you review the contract information and spot potential corruption risks. Step 2 focuses on contract implementation, checking whether the project is being carried out as promised on the ground. And step 3 looks at results and impact, evaluating whether the outcomes match the objectives and serve the public interest. Along the way, we'll also highlight common corruption schemes to watch out for. Payments for substandard or undelivered outputs, unjustified contract modifications, sometimes called scope creep, and irregular subcontracting, where phantom companies appear in the process. Recognizing these patterns will help you spot red flags and strengthen accountability in climate and environmental projects. So why the source of financing is important? The source of financing is for the project and therefore also for individual contracts within the project may result in supervision by the institution granting the funds, for instance the World Bank, or result in the management system and control being taken over by another institution, for instance involved in the implementation of European Union funds. This also means the right to access additional documents, especially if they are public information, within the meaning of the law. When projects are co-financed by the European Union, both European Union and national law usually add extra rules for how they are carried out and monitored. Within the EU and national management systems, there are specialized institutions that make sure everything is implemented correctly. They also have tools, for example IT systems, to help with research and identification. So, is it easier to spot red flags, signs of corruption? Yes. Based on agreements with the beneficiary, there are clear requirements for submitting documentation and going through control processes. That includes on-site checks of how the project is being implemented, as well as control over public procurement procedures. The information gathered by these institutions can be a valuable source, and if there are suspicions of irregularities or corruption-related crimes, those can also be reported directly to them. So let's begin with step 1, the desk analysis. This is where we sit down and look closely at the information we can gather from the contract itself. The goal here is simple: spotting potential corruption risks before they become bigger problems. When citizens monitor public procurement contracts, especially those connected to climate and environmental projects, the very first step is to examine the contract information. Tools like opentender.eu make this easier by automatically importing key fields and even generating an integrity profile. That profile is important. It highlights possible corruption risks. And remember, the lower the integrity score, the higher the risk. During this part of the training, you will learn 3 essential things. First, the different types of public contracts. Second, the role of the contract supervisor. And third, how subcontracting works. These are the building blocks for understanding how procurement should function and where red flags might appear. When we are talking about contract types in environmental and climate projects, it helps to think in terms of suppliers, services, and works. Suppliers are the physical goods, like water quality monitoring kits, air pollution sensors, or solar panels for public buildings. Services are about expertise and oversight, such as environmental impact assessments, audits of waste management processes, or climate risk modeling and geographic information system, mapping for flood defense planning, which might help by putting all the data on a map, making it easier to see where risks like flooding or deforestation might happen, track changes over time, and plan smarter defenses. Works. Works are the big infrastructure projects, building flood defense levees, restoring wetlands, or constructing renewable energy facilities like wind farms. But there are also projects where these functions get combined. For example, a project might cover building a wind farm, carrying out environmental monitoring, and buying the necessary equipment, the turbines themselves. When we can see these categories clearly, it's easier for us to understand what's being bought and to check whether the contract really supports the environmental or climate goals.
Let's take a closer look at the kinds of projects we see in the environmental and climate dimensions. On the environmental side, projects often focus on protecting biodiversity, things like safeguarding endangered species or restoring habitats. Pollution control is another big area, whether it's cleaning up rivers, improving air quality, or tackling soil contamination. Waste management projects are also key, especially those that promote recycling and circular economy solutions. And of course, ecosystem restoration, bringing wetlands, forests, and rivers back to life, is a cornerstone of environmental action. Finally, sustainable resource use projects like renewable energy or greener farming practices. Those kinds of contracts help ensure we are not depleting what nature gives us. Now, when we shift to climate-related projects, we usually talk about two big categories: adaptation and mitigation. Climate adaptation projects help communities to cope with the impacts of climate change, that is, flood defenses, drought-resilient crops, or resilient infrastructure. Mitigation projects aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, for example through renewable energy or energy efficiency. Carbon sequestration projects like reforestation are designed to capture and store carbon. Then we have energy transition projects, for example moving societies toward clean transport. And finally, community resilience projects. These are about people, education, early warning systems, and building local capacity to respond to climate risks. Together, these types of projects form the backbone of global efforts to protect our environment and to tackle climate change. Now, let's move on to a new topic. I want to share with you an interesting story connected to subcontracting. It's a case that shows how things can look fine on paper, but once you dig deeper, you start to see warning signs. This story will help us understand why subcontracting can sometimes hide risks, and how spotting those risks early makes a big difference. A regional government announced a contract to build a mid-sized wind farm along with the environmental monitoring services. The project looked very promising: clean energy, local jobs, and climate-friendly infrastructure. But as the contract unfolded, irregularities began to surface. The main contractor listed several subcontractors for specialized tasks: environmental audits, turbine maintenance, and waste management. Citizens reviewing the procurement documents noticed something odd. One subcontractor was registered only a few weeks before the contract was signed. Another subcontractor had no history in environmental services. It was actually a small trading company with no staff listed. And a third subcontractor appeared in the documents, but couldn't be found in the National Business Registry at all. These phantom or irregular subcontractors raised questions: were they real companies, or just shells created to siphon money? How the red flags were found in this project? Local watchdog groups and engaged citizens carried out desk research using publicly available documents, that is, procurement contracts and annexes, so listed subcontractors, their roles, and payment schedules. They checked also business registry records, checked whether subcontractors were legally registered, their founding dates, and declared activities. Another documents reviewed were the company's websites and public profiles. They looked for evidence of real operations, staff, or past projects. And financial disclosures were available, of course. They checked whether the subcontractors had capacity to actually deliver services. Through this desk analysis, the citizens and monitors spotted that newly created companies with no track record suddenly received large contracts. Companies with irrelevant business activities, for example, trading goods and not environmental services, were engaged here. And non-existent companies that appeared only in contract annexes but not in official registries were also included in this contract. And all those issues raised red flags for corruption.
What are possible forms of corruption in subcontracting? Cost overcharges. Sometimes a subcontractor, working hand in hand with the main contractor, will deliberately raise the prices of their services. The goal is to make extra profit, and often the prime contractor gets a commission or kickback for allowing it. Hiding errors. In other cases, the prime contractor might ignore mistakes made by the subcontractor. Why? Because they're benefiting from the arrangement. The problem is that these hidden errors can cause serious damage to the investor in the long run. Unfair financial practices. Another common issue is when the prime contractor delays payments. They hold back money that should go to the subcontractors, meaning those subcontractors get paid much later than they deserve. This also keeps funds away from the investor for longer than necessary. Irregular and phantom subcontracting. What it means and why it matters. When a big project is funded, say to protect the environment or fight climate change, the main contractor often hires smaller companies, subcontractors, to do parts of the work. That's normal. But sometimes subcontracting is used in shady ways, and that's where corruption can sneak in. Monitoring subcontractors is really important. It makes sure the work they do actually gets delivered, meets the quality promised in the main contract, and respects environmental standards or certifications. If subcontracting is irregular or even phantom, meaning the subcontractor exists only on paper, money can be wasted, and the project may fail to deliver real benefits. Here are some warning signs that you can spot during desk analysis, even just by looking at the documents. That is, by reviewing contracts, bids, and reports without even visiting the site. Losing bidders, suddenly hired as subcontractors. Imagine a company loses the tender, but then pops up as a subcontractor under the winning bidder. That can look like a backroom deal. Competitors listed as subcontractors in the same tender. If a bidder says they'll use subcontractors who are also competing for the same contract, it raises questions about fairness and collusion. Experienced companies don't bid, but later show up as subcontractors. Sometimes, strong companies avoid bidding directly, only to appear later as subcontractors. Or a bidder offers a very low price, withdraws, and then reappears as a subcontractor. Both situations can suggest manipulation. And another possible red flags: cascade subcontracting. This is when subcontractors themselves hire other subcontractors, and so on. The longer the chain, the harder it is to track responsibility and quality. Mismatch between contract requirements and actual work. If the contract says one thing, but the subcontractor delivers something different or less, that's a clear red flag. Subcontractor doing work that the main subcontractor was supposed to do personally. Sometimes the contract requires the main contractor to perform certain tasks directly. If they pass those tasks off to someone else, it can be a little shady. Subcontractor doesn't actually perform the work. In some cases, the subcontractor is listed as providing capacity or expertise, but in reality they don't do anything. That's a phantom subcontractor. Why citizens should care? These tricks may sound technical, but they matter because they waste public money, weaken environmental protections, and reduce trust in climate projects. Spotting these red flags early, just by analyzing paperwork, can prevent corruption before it harms communities or the environment. Now, let's take a look at an example from Polish practice. The Supreme Audit Office in Poland has pointed out some serious red flags in subcontracting practices. These issues boil down to weak contract safeguards that leave subcontractors exposed and reduce accountability for main contractors. Key red flags in subcontracting, according to the Polish Supreme Audit Office findings. No proof of payment required. Contracts often don't require the main contractor to show evidence that they've actually paid subcontractors. This means that subcontractors can be left unpaid, while the main contractor still gets away with fulfilling their obligations on paper. Missing penalties for non-submission of subcontracting agreements. Contracts fail to include penalties if the main contractor doesn't submit subcontracting agreements for approval. Without this, the contracting authority has no leverage to enforce transparency or ensure that the subcontractors are properly vetted. No withdrawal clause for unauthorized subcontracting. Contracts don't give the contracting authority the right to withdraw if the contractor signs subcontracts without approval. This loophole allows contractors to bypass oversight and bring in subcontractors without the authority's knowledge or consent. Now let's take a look at another example, this one from Italian practice. Italy recently changed its public contracts code, legislative decree number 36. Before, so-called cascading subcontracting was banned. Now it's allowed. On paper, this gives companies more flexibility, but in practice, it may open the door to corruption. Politically connected firms can hide kickbacks in long subcontracting chains. Criminal infiltration. Organized crime groups can slip into climate or environmental projects by posing as subcontractors. Money laundering. Dirty money can be cleaned through fake invoices and phantom companies. Imagine a big climate project to clean up polluted land. The government hires a main contractor. That contractor passes the job to another company, which passes it again and again. By the time you reach the fourth subcontractor, nobody really knows who's doing the work. One of those subcontractors could be a shell company linked to an organized crime, issuing invoices for services that never happened. The project looks legitimate on paper, but in reality, it's a front for laundering money and exploiting workers. Now it's time for a little quiz. Case study. In a wetland restoration project, invoices showed payments to a specialized subcontractor for planting aquatic vegetation. However, site visits revealed no such team ever arrived. The main contractor pocketed the funds while the habitat remains barren. So the question is, which of the following is a red flag for phantom subcontracting during contract implementation? Answer A. Subcontractors were not present on site during the check. B. Payments are made to subcontractors who never appear or perform work. Answer C. Subcontractors provide irregular progress reports. Take your time. Please don't hurry. I'll give you 30 seconds to answer to this question. It's time for an answer. The correct answer is B. Why? Phantom subcontracting occurs when payments are directed to entities that do not actually perform any work. This drains project funds and hides corruption behind paperwork. So it's time for another quiz. Let's take a look at case study. A subcontractor hired to install erosion control barriers along a reservoir used cheaper, low-quality fabric. Within months, heavy rains washed the barriers away, causing sediment to pollute the water. The project failed its climate resilience goal, and taxpayers paid for ineffective work. Which risks arises when subcontractors deliver substandard work compared to contract specifications? Here you can see possible answers. A. There is no apparent risk, as we can rely on the subcontractor's qualifications. Answer B. Environmental damage or failure to meet restoration goals. And answer C. faster completion of the project. Take your time, don't hurry, I'll give you 30 seconds to answer. Answer B. Answer B is correct. Why? Substandard work undermines the environmental objectives of the contract. Poor materials or techniques can cause long-term ecological harm and waste public resources. And the last quiz for you. Let's take a look at this case study. During a reforestation initiative, the original subcontractor was abruptly replaced with another firm linked to the project manager's relative. No justification was documented. The new subcontractor charged double for samplings, reducing the number of trees planted and compromising the project's environmental impact. Which situation signals irregular subcontracting in environmental contracts? Answer E. Subcontractors are irregularly changed during project implementation with the prime contractor's approval. Answer B. Subcontractors are not regularly fulfilling tasks according to the schedule. And answer C. Subcontractors changed mid-project without justification or proper approval. Now, take your time. Please don't hurry. I'll give you 30 seconds to answer. Answer C. Answer C is correct. Why? Irregular subcontracting often involves sudden, unexplained changes in subcontractors, bypassing fair competition and oversight. This can conceal favoritism, inflated costs, or hidden ownership links. And that's the end of this module. Please remember, awareness is the first step towards accountability. Thank you for your active listening, and may these tools empower effective monitoring of public procurement projects. Ms. Ewa Paderewska, expert in climate adaptation and environmental protection, and Mr. Przemysław Ostrowski, expert in public procurement, would like to kindly thank you for participating in this module. Thank you very much.